Well, it's really good to see everybody. How are we doing? Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Good.
Very nice.
Great to see you, Chairman.
Well, I had knee replacement surgery. It went very well. The recovery is everything it's supposed to be. But it would have been difficult for me to really focus on the meeting on those early times. And I do want to express my gratitude and appreciation to Vice Chair Varner for the able and professional and courteous and welcoming way that you conducted all of those meetings, which prompted me to get back here sooner rather than later. I wasn't sure I wanted everybody else to get a taste of how well you run the meeting, so I better get back. But thank you for thanks for asking and thanks for your help. So let's start the meeting. This is Thursday, December 8th. I'm sorry, 2022. The hearing on California's Developmental Disabilities System, and we're calling this Part 3. I'm Pedro Nava, and I'm the chair of the Little Hoover Commission. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's introduce the other commissioners who are here with us on Zoom and on telephone. We have Vice Chair Sean Varner. We will be joined by Commissioner Dion Aroner. I think we have David Byer, I see there. Anthony Canella. Bill Emerson is on the phone, and Yana Sidley. Also with us today are the commission staff, Executive Director Ethan Rarick, Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foster, Project Manager Crystal Beckham and Tristan Stein, and Analyst Ashley Hurley. I got to do a little bit of housekeeping before we turn to our subject. Because of disparities of different groups are the focus of this study, this hearing will include live Spanish and American Sign Language interpretation to help improve accessibility for consumers in the developmental disability system. Please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to select your preferred language. Commissioners' audio and video will be turned on throughout the duration of the hearing. Commissioners, you may mute yourself if you wish. Please remember to unmute yourself if you want to make a comment or ask a question during the hearing. The video and audio of our hearing witnesses will be turned on when they speak. Members of the public will be muted during the hearing. We will have a public comment session at the end. Those who wish to make a comment will be unmuted during that session. If you want to make a public comment, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom by clicking on the hand icon to join our public comment queue. And that is featured on the screen. Before making public comment, please make sure that you have selected your preferred language using the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom screen to help avoid confusion. Those who have joined us by phone may either dial #9 to raise their hand on Zoom, or you can send an email to littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov, letting us know that you want to address the commission. You must provide the phone number from which you have joined the meeting so that our staff knows who to unmute. Staff will be, and that's what happens if you don't shut off your phone. Staff will be monitoring raised hands and emails requesting comment throughout the duration of our hearing. As is usual at commission hearings, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Due to the intense public comment in this topic, we will be holding a 60-minute public comment period. That is unusual, but we have had a significant increase in public interest of this particular topic. We are recording today's hearing, and after it, staff will place a permanent link to the recording on our website and upload it to the YouTube channel and Facebook page. Now to the substance of today's hearing. This is the Commission's final hearing examining California's Developmental Disabilities System. Over the last few months, we held 3 events on this important topic. At our first hearing, we discussed what it is like for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families to access services and for service providers to participate in the system. We also held an advisory committee roundtable that focused on identifying ways to reduce disparities and increase access to services. Our second hearing explored how the system is identifying and addressing disparities and working to improve access to services. Today, we will continue the conversation with testimony from the California State Council on Developmental Disabilities. I want to thank Commissioners Emerson and Aaroner for serving on the subcommittee for this study and for their leadership on this topic. This hearing was organized by Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foster, and I'd like to ask Tamar if she would be so kind as to introduce our first and our only witness for the hearing.
Thank you so much, Chairman Nava. I'd like to welcome Aaron Carruthers. He has served as Executive Director of the California State Council on Developmental Disabilities since 2015, where he is the Chief Administrative Officer and responsible for carrying out the Council's mission, goals, and policy objectives. He has worked in civil rights policy and programs for more than 25 years. Welcome, welcome, Executive Director Carruthers.
Thank you so much, Chair Nava. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you to Tamar and the excellent staff of the Little Hoover Commission. I'm Aaron Carruthers. I am the Executive Director of California's State Council on Developmental Disabilities. I'm the child of parents with developmental and other disabilities, a person with disabilities myself, and the parent of a child with disabilities. So thank you to all of you for exercising your independent oversight role in studying racial access and disparities in community services that are provided through the Department of Developmental Services and regional centers. My tone today may be measured, maybe calm, maybe even keel. That's because I speak state speak. But please do not let my professionalism kind of get in the way of the fire in the belly that I bring to this conversation and to the work that we're all do today. So I'd like to start off by just telling you a little bit about the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, give you some perspective and historical context of Lanterman Act and its promises, and then make 6 specific recommendations for you. But overall, the overall arching theme is this commission has intuitively figured out the route to understanding and finding the solutions, which is to listen to the community. Your addition of one more hearing just for public comment is exactly the DNA and the core of how our system came about and how we're going to find our way forward. And having us, the State Council is just the one speaker, is perfect framing for our role. So more about us. Established over 50 years ago, the State Council on Developmental Disabilities was created by Congress, funded by Congress. We are an independent state department. We're not under any other department or even under agency. We are here to be a guiding force to create life-altering changes for approximately 625,000 Californians with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That number, 625, is different than what you've been hearing so far, around 400,000 who are served by regional centers. That's because we follow federal law and federal prevalence data states that because of differentials and definitions of who meets a developmental disability and who has access to services, California and its regional center system talks about 400. We're broader, we talk about 625,000. Our statutory authority is to build the capacity of people with developmental disabilities in their families to be their own advocates, to join them side by side in that advocacy, and to change systems. We're the only state entity with the statutory authority to change systems specifically within developmental disabilities. And we're really proud of the work that we did. Statewide, we have a team of 50 throughout 12 offices. So we have reach through roots of the soil of every inch of California, and our work in 2022 impacted 5 million Californians. So we are small and mighty. So the commission, the State Council thanks the commission in your foundational materials about this hearing is by acknowledging that the Lanterman Act is groundbreaking legislation. It's a person-centered promise of an entitlement to meet individual needs. And this promise is still unparalleled anywhere else in the country. There's something more though, and something very modern. At its core, it's a promise of equity. It's ambitious, it's expansive, and it's far from perfect, as you've heard. But it's also more than a structure. It's a civil rights document. And this is a civil rights conversation. So thank you for the needed focus on it. Throughout your hearings in the work group, the commission is, you've heard passionate perspectives how the system is not fully delivering the Lanterman Act's promise. You have a queue of many people who are ready to tell you more about that. You've heard how the system is a no right door system. It's opaque, it's complex. Regional centers are complex. They're also compacted and complicated by their role as payer of last resort. That means individuals and families have to be sent through a labyrinth of multiple systems before securing services with a regional center. This has cultural impacts. If I am a culture where it's comfortable for me to advocate for what I need, I may be more successful. If I'm of a culture that has a sense of distrust with services, being sent away time and time again is going to have an impact. If I'm from a culture where you have to succeed, constantly being put through a process of proving to fail before you get services has an impact. If I'm of a culture of great pride and dignity in what I do and my experience of a no right door and being sent feels demeaning, and that I am made to beg for services, which I won't do. So the commission's also heard and documented that because of some of these dynamics, which I greatly oversimplified, they're complex, who's being left out is more likely to be poor and BIPOC Californians. It's a truism. The more resources a person has, the more likely you are to get resources in a system that rewards those culturally comfortable with advocacy. The commission, I really want to acknowledge you individually yourselves. You've directly experienced the frustrations of trying to find answers and trying to find who's accountable. This is a common experience for individuals and families in the system. Despite these challenges, despite the gaps, despite the failings, hopefully you also heard in the testimony of a core belief in the Lanterman Act itself, in its promise of equity. And everybody here, and every testimony I've heard, and everybody I'm about to hear later, I believe in the collective push that we're here to make sure the Lanterman Act succeeds. We're seeing a lot of that within the governor and the legislature, continue to invest in the state's IDD system. The director testified how there's over 40 new initiatives that were created within the past 2 years. One of the biggest of those initiatives is implementing the rate reform study, 1.8 billion adjustment to a long underfunded system, giving a starved system what it needs to come up to baseline is something critical as we look at the problems with vendors and inaccessibility with regional centers and their common sense of a promise that can't be delivered. Added to these initiatives, the State Council and other advocates have co-sponsored legislation in the past few years to end the practice of subminimum wage, to make fair hearings fair, to provide off-ramps to conservatorships. So all of these efforts taken together are intended to fill gaps, provide new services, push the system itself forward. If I can make a half a step back and say we're almost in a period of hyper-reform. And as a systems change agent, the Little Hoover Commission knows that often reforms beget even more reforms. I admit, as a state council, we're guilty of that. I'm not patient enough to wait for these reforms to play out before I'm coming back with the next ideas of new changes, including today. I've got 6 recommendations for you. But the State Council is really optimistic in what the commission will produce, because we hope that your study, your recommendations will add to this collective thinking for success. So here's my tip. To find the path forward from where we are to where we need to go, we have to listen to the community. Listening to the community is the right thing to do. And if that's not reason enough, it's law. Listening to people served is at the core of the Federal DD Act. It's entwined with the Home and Community-Based Services Waiver, and it's part of the Lanterman Act. So from the State Council's historical position as an independent statewide entity, last year in our work, I told you it impacted 5 million people. We do that through working with 700 community partners. We've advised one-on-one over 91,000 Californians about their problems last year. 18,000 people came to our trainings. We've held 1,200 targeted activities just on bridging disparities, including activities in 91 languages. We listen, we're in the community, and thank you, because today's session is about hearing from the public. So from what we've heard
Mr.
from
Carruthers,
the public and what the council members have to say, I have some recommendations for you.
Mr. Carruthers, this is Pedro. So
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
what I neglected to tell you is with our commissioners, you're likely to get interrupted. And I want you to take that as a compliment, because what it means is that the commissioners have reviewed the material. They're prepared to ask some questions. They look to you as someone with particular expertise that can help fill in some of the gaps of information that perhaps we don't have. And true to that experience, we have Commissioner Sidley, who has raised her hand. And I apologize for interrupting you, but I've learned over time that when my commissioners raise their hands, it's probably best to give them a chance to express what it is they have to say.
Chair Nava, I'm familiar with this commission's culture, and I actually started to worry that I was getting so far without any questions. I thought, oh man, I better spice it up here.
There's Commissioner
thank you, sir.
Sidley.
So thank you, Chairman. And Aaron, thank you so much for your testimony. I certainly and greatly appreciate you here today. I am new to this issue and have been learning quite a bit, and some of it clearly through my questioning, you can tell that appalled at some of the things that I've learned. I appreciate what you're saying about the Land and Rent Act, and it is a civil rights issue. And we should be proud of what the state of California is doing and leading in this area. And so with that, I have a couple questions for you. First of all, I'm wondering, in your capacity, do you have the ability to review budgets for the regional centers? Or how would someone from the public review the budget of the regional center?
Great targeted question. So within statute, there is language that says regional centers should send their budgets to the state council. We also can sit with an individuals or family side by side to review whatever budget has been approved for them in their individualized budget and advise them on strategy if they feel like it's not enough.
And statute says that they should send their budget to state council. Does that happen?
Hit or miss. I would also say I'm not going to hold any regional center to not doing something that I'm not going to do something with. So if budgets are coming to us, we actually need to build the capacity internally to figure out, okay, how are we analyzing them and what are reporting out for the benefit of those served by regional centers and for the legislature administration.
Okay. I personally, I've been thinking the money that the regional centers push out is government funds. And so having served in a capacity in the government my whole career, there should be tremendous transparency. And I understand that they are nonprofits, but the money is still taxpayer dollars. And so I still am very concerned about transparency, access to that information. And so that is the vein in which I asked that question. So my next question to you is, you indicated you had 50 people. I'm curious, to advocate for more people, that's to advocate to the federal government, right?
It could be to the federal government. It could also be to the state government. If the state sees the service that we are doing, they want more of. Something we've done in the past, they want more of, or something new in the future, they want more of. They can fund too. So we're not permitted from general fund. We receive no general fund, but we do have three contracts with the Department of Developmental Services for different, I'll just call them lines of business that we keep separate from the federal work that we're talking about now.
Okay, and where are you physically located? It seems to me that particularly in the communities that we're talking about, but for anybody who needs help with the regional centers, or anybody who needs help with this complex law, that if you were co-located in a regional center or in the building right next door, then somebody could walk in, get some support, and then go in and get some guidance through this labyrinth of laws. So I'm wondering where you're located and what you would think of, if you're not co-located, what would you think of the idea of co-location?
Great. I'm in the headquarters in Sacramento. I have 12 offices throughout the state, from as far north as Ukiah and as far south as San Diego, San Bernardino, Los Angeles, Orange County, San Jose, Oakland, Stockton. I'm going to miss somebody, Vallejo. I'm going to miss somebody, and they're going to be very mad at me. But from that, there's co-location, and then there's kind of parallel location. Our offices track and map over a geographic area with the regional centers within. Fresno, sorry, Fresno, didn't mean to leave you out. And but we've actually philosophically said we don't want to locate within a regional center, that our role of being independent is important enough to stay outside, but parallel and present.
And how do you advertise for families to know that you exist and that this help is available?
I got it. It's word of mouth. It's you help somebody. Our whole system is created by, I want to give you the imagery of kitchen tables. You know, every family that gets a diagnosis in so many ways feels like a pioneer. And you're on your own and finding your own information about what you need for your family, your loved one, until at your own kitchen table, until you'll find a similar kitchen table with somebody experiencing what you're doing. Those kitchen tables are really who came together to push the Lanterman Act, over 50 years ago. And our system hasn't really evolved much since, because of that pioneer effect. So part of what we do is continuously work to find, where are those new kitchen tables being formed? How do we connect them with similar kitchen tables, and how do we bring them into services and larger advocacy?
Let me ask a few other questions that you may or may not.
Oh, look, Commissioner, if I could, add to that. One thing that really expanded our footprint was the pandemic. So with a partnership with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, we, through our regional offices and community partners, at the time we had over 500 active community organizations we were working with, distributed over 110 million pieces of PPE. Really proud of that effort. That's a lot, 110 million. What we found is that the community, we're reaching places the traditional service delivery system wasn't reaching. Regional centers had their supplies, the public health had their supplies. We're constantly finding the space in between and going and filling that. So we're bringing new people in. Once they found out that we were here and had something to offer, they've come back. Our numbers from the sort of, I talk about one-on-one working with people about their questions, their needs. If I'm getting my dates right, about 2017, our numbers were about 2,000 people we worked with, and last year was 89,000 people. We reached a whole huge number of people who are now coming back and saying, "What else do you have?"
So on that note, and so you said that the system is designed for the regional center to be the payer of last resort. So if you're the payer of last resort, generally you start with an answer of no. And then you come back because who else can pay? So if you do start with the no, and then you have to come back, what is the appeal process in your experience transparent? Would a family know what to do in order to appeal? And is that something that your organization would then be available to help the family appeal the first no?
We can, I think you've had really great testimony, particularly from Disability Rights California, who laid out what is that first wave process before you get the final no. You have had great experiential testimony from other witnesses who've said this is what it feels like to run to get the no. Our role is to help somebody, whether they're still in the process of collecting no's from the system of generic services. That's our phrase for, we're the payer of last resort, go get something over there. So we're advising on the other systems. When we help them, we can advise and help through that process. If they get the no, we can also help and advise on what are their formal appeal processes through the regional center system. Where we can't go, for 40 years, we used to be able to sort of cross through the doorway with people. Whether it was regional centers or also schools with IEPs. We'd work with somebody, find out their needs, and then prepare, and then side by side join them in the meetings, go through the doorway with them. Federal government in 2014 said, California, stop. That's not what we want the congressional dollars to do. We had to step out of it. The need is there. It's bigger. It's growing. And in so many ways, it solves a lot of the questions that come up, but I don't want to go too far into that.
Okay, I see my other commissioners have their hand up, so I'll stop asking, but what you've touched on is, I think that the families would do better if they had some support somehow, because the difference you've described from those that are wealthy and higher educated, they can navigate the system, and those that don't have those resources need some support. And so that's just, I think you touched on it when you said they pulled you out. Well, someone should fill that. But with that, I'm going to stop and let my other commissioners speak. Thank you. Thank you very much again for your testimony. I appreciate it greatly.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. We have Commissioner Emerson, then followed by Commissioner Byer.
Thank you, Chairman Nava. I would like to wait and hear his 6 recommendations, then I'll come back after that.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Byer. You're muted, sir.
Sorry, and thank you for your life of service. One of my favorite phrases is Thomas Edison, who said, vision without execution is hallucination. And so we're going to be focusing a lot on execution. And there are 3 themes. I'm not going to ask as thoughtful a set of questions as Commissioner Sidley, but the 3 themes are governance, racial and ethnic disparity, and assistance with employment. And you seem to have listened or watched or read all of the testimony we've given before. So I want to ask you just general questions on governance, disparity, and employment. So on the governance question, this system is 50 years old. Regions were set up long ago when populations were different. The system of delivery was different. 50 years ago, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have paraprofessionals who've been well trained. If it were up to you, how would you change the structure of delivery to make the regional centers better governed, better overseen by the State Department, and more transparent?
I think I'd probably start with accepting the system, not as it is, not accepting it, but working with it as it is. It was set up as it is for a purpose over 50 years ago. There was wisdom and foresight into that. Over the years, it's been complicated by the funding that's less and less flexible, systems that are more and more complex, individuals with needs that are living longer and more complex. I think there's belief in the system, but I would start with the regional centers are nonprofits. A nonprofit structure for oversight is where is its funding source coming from, and where is its governance structure. So its funding sources is state funds, as Commissioner Sidley said, and it is its authority and oversight is through the Department of Developmental Services. There are a number of initiatives underway, including looking at strengthening the performance contracts between the department and the regional center. There's also initiatives regarding individual outcome measurements. So can we create a system of outcomes that measure, are people improving? Are people doing better because of the dollars that are invested? I think these are good initiatives. It's part of the era of hyper reform that I talked about that we're in. We, some of it, need to watch it play out. I think there's also the regional center boards themselves. Do the boards reflect the demographics, the catchment area that they serve? Making sure we do that at the council. Look for strong council members. We have 31 council members appointed by the governor. Look for strong council members but then also look at who the council members represent and try to recommend candidates to the governor that reflect and will balance out our representation for California itself.
Okay, the second and third, racial and ethnic disparities and the level of employment by recipients of developmental disability services. There was I'll call it fact dispute in our last hearing with the state director. And do you have comments about the record of the regional centers on racial and ethnic disparity and the level of employment?
Commissioner, if you could tie the 2 pieces together for me.
Okay, so okay, on racial and ethnic disparity, it's a problem. The legislature recognized it's a problem. Over a 3-year time period, approved $44 million of additional assistance. but the perception, the statistics on racial and ethnic disparity seem not to have changed. That looks like a problem. Do you think we should do more? The legislature should do more. Similarly, on level of employment, I know we're not the same as Oklahoma, who has an 83% employment rate. And there are different populations and how you count and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like California is behind many comparably situated states in level of employment for recipients of services. So those are fact questions. You're an oversight body. Help us sort out the facts.
I think whether the legislature or the state wants to do more or not, the community is going to come forward and ask for it and demand it. And again, I feel like I'm feeling the weight of the queue behind me, who's part of the community, responding to come and say, we want this. It's an entitlement. We deserve it. How do we get it? Regarding employment, what's a fascinating one, Commissioner, we do our work by asking the community every 5 years, what do you want us to work on? And looking at the trends in those responses, I'll just say over the last 10 years alone, we saw a dramatic shift. About 10 years ago, we got an answer that we typically saw over the decades, which was kind of get my benefit. It comes down to get my benefits and help me keep them. 5 years ago, the number one answer jumped up to employment. I want a job. Followed right after by get my benefits and help me keep them. Last year when we did the work, the top groupings of answers were, I want a job, I want a house, and I want to be safe. There is a generational shift that we're going through that is looking at differences in expectations for myself or for my loved one. And whether the system is there and ready to respond, like the people are gonna push the system into delivering what it needs.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I think you're responding, but you're on mute.
Mr. Byer,
so-
Commissioner Byer,
sorry.
you're muted.
So you didn't really respond on racial and ethnic disparity. The
The
legislature
gaps are
thought it
throughout,
was a problem,
yeah.
appropriated
As
money.
you said, it's well documented. It's throughout. It's between what is the demographics of who's being served by the regional center versus the community. There's documented evidence to show the people aren't even finding the regional center's door. We have a decade's worth of information regarding purchase of service disparities. What do we do with that information? We have information documenting this in multiple levels. And Commissioner Emerson, one of my recommendations is let's get knowledge rich as we are data rich, because we have a lot of information. We just don't quite know what it means. What does it mean that there are documented decade of purchase of service racial disparities within regional centers? If that data set doesn't tell us the answer, let's go ask the other questions. So yes, I think this commission has well documented a backup and see in every direction we look documentation regarding racial disparities.
Thank you. Let me just make a comment before you continue, because I was really struck by the remark that you made having to do with cultural perspectives and how it impacts what people do. Some years ago, I was an attorney representing a family whose son, it was a wrongful death case, and we got to the point where I wanted, as their attorney, to introduce family photos to show that this person wasn't as he had been characterized by the other side. And the photos would have been of their son, an adult, who had been participating in family dinners and family outings. And they refused to let me do it because they felt that the jury was not respectful of them. And they felt that the other side in this trial had unfairly characterized their son and his activities. And in spite of my efforts to say, this is how you get them to understand who your son is, they just felt so offended by it that they were not going to, as you said, beg. They saw that as begging, to put forth before the other side in a trial affirmative and positive information about their son. And I just got the feeling that as we deal with the regional centers and how outreach is formulated, that if the regional centers don't have a very strong component that recognizes the cultural differences between people who are to receive services, then they are just going to back away from it because they will feel insulted and diminished, and they're not going to go through that. And I think you pointed that out. But if you would please just continue, because I think we want to get to your recommendations.
Thank you, Chairman Nava. I'll be brief because your comments go into my first recommendation, which is as you're listening today and as you're thinking through the rest of the work and the recommendations, listen to needs based on intersectionality, not just identity. So when we think about disability, we think about, okay, we know what that means, but then add racial and cultural experience and identity on top of that, and that changes the dynamics. We often will talk about racial disparities in sort of monolithic terms. Well, what does a Latino community need? What does the Black African American community need? Depends on who you're talking to. Layer on a person's experiences with gender identity, religion, sexual orientation. Part of having an exercise in equity, which is what we're doing in the individual person-centered based approach within the Lanterman Act, is an exercise of understanding the whole person first. It takes time, but it's what we do in our system. So first recommendation, listen to needs based on intersectionality, not just identity. Next recommendation is connect the kitchen tables. We gave Commissioner Sidley the imagery of how our system was found on the kitchen tables, but these kitchen tables continue to emerge all of the time. This is really the frontier between the disparities and the gap between who's coming into the system through their own experience and diagnosis versus who's connected to services. So investing in actually bringing together and connecting those kitchen tables. A third recommendation, provide advocacy supports again. So what the State Council had to step out of, fund it to do it again. This addresses so much. But what it does is it specifically around racial disparities is that it answers this question of the authority distance dynamic or the authority mistrust dynamic. So if my cultural perspective is that authority is right, which creates distance and I don't challenge it, or authority has had a complicated generational history of being misserved, and there's mistrust of authority. That prevents people from getting what they want from a system that rewards a culture of advocacy. So providing direct individual representation advocacy, again, puts somebody on an individual side of the table, literally. Put somebody on the family side to not only be that broker of language, not only to be a navigator of multiple systems, but also to bridge some of those cultural dynamics that are getting in the way and adding to disparities. Quickly for the others, and I think I've touched on all these already. So invest in becoming knowledge rich, not just data rich. Talked about that. So the fifth one is focus on the 12 billion, not just the 11 million. So the governor and the legislature should be really proud of the 11 million that they invest annually in the service access and equity grants. These are rare dollars. No other state has them, or putting their money where their values are in this way. But a lot of attention goes to the $11 million and what happens to it and how is it being funded and what is it doing? And the Georgetown National Center for Cultural Competence is going to produce an evaluation later this spring to say, all right, here's the impact of them. From my point of view, these grants should be going to invest in ideas that transform the $12 billion system, not just fill gaps and needs, because when the 12 billion whole system is functioning as it should, we don't need the 11 million, likely don't need it as we did. Last recommendation, and thank you for your patience and all the time, find out the pandemic's impact on racial disparities. So as we all know, in every front, COVID exacerbated so many existing systemic problems. We were already facing racial disparities in regional center services, but also in housing, in employment, in access to and quality of healthcare, access to and quality of education. At the State Council, we're hearing it's worse. We really need to know what happened around this. So as a matter of racial equity and justice, the state needs to know really what is the true span of the divide as we try to work to bridge it. So thank you, commissioners. Those are my recommendations.
Thank you. Commissioner Emerson, you said that you would speak after you heard the recommendation. So let me turn to you.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Carruthers, I want to thank you for your testimony today and for your patience. We've had to reschedule you several times. At our last hearing, you were scheduled and then we scheduled a little later that day. And then finally we had to cancel because our meeting went so long. So thank you very much for your patience. Over 40 years ago, on February 21st, 1979, Frank Lanterman spoke to the State Council, and I'd like to quote from that speech. "You are the State Council. You are supposed to monitor this system. You are supposed to advise the legislature and the governor when problems emerge. Why isn't the Department of Developmental Services fighting to improve and increase services in the community? Why isn't the department pressuring regional centers to locate additional unserved clients and to secure all the services prescribed in the individual program plan? And why is the State Department of Developmental Services doing business as usual? Don't expect me to let you off the hook. Be an advocate for the developmentally disabled. You have nothing to lose. And you can regain the respect to which you are entitled. It is not too late for you to have an impact," end quote. So I have several questions. And the first one is, do you think Frank Lanterman would say the same thing today? And what responsibility does the State Council have to reduce the disparities that exist in the DD system, both within the regional centers by race and program disparities between regional centers?
Thank you, Commissioner Emerson, and thank you for your deep lifetime of involvement within developmental disabilities fields. We're better because of your work as a senator in the area and my still daily work on legislation that you authored. So thank you for that. What an amazing quote you found. Thank you for that. A voice from 1979. Your first question of, do you think he'd say the same? You and I can both speculate, but as you're reading it, I was thinking, boy, it sounds like he's reading it today. And the State Council has always stepped into that space in between the gaps to try to fill them. And we embrace, we take on, and we're proud of our work around bridging disparities. There's more that we can do. There's more that we can all do, but we are all sharing the responsibility. As I shared before, some of the numbers in the work that we've done last year, there's 1,200 projects that we have going on that are working around targeted disparities, to bridge disparities. Language access is not a proxy for disparity work, but we're also proud that the work that we're doing spans 19 languages. So by staying connected to the community, by bringing people connected to the services they're entitled to and bringing them into the system, it's a person by person, kitchen table by kitchen table, dynamic and conversation, and we're proud of that work.
Another question, what is your annual budget? And do you have enough staff to fulfill the system accountability role that you're supposed to?
Our current budget for the federal dollars is $7.9 million. And again, that's for 50 staff over 12 offices. I'm an executive director. Of course, I'm going to say, no, I don't have enough resources to do the work we need to do. I would love to meet, if you've ever posed that question and someone said, oh, I have plenty, we're good. I would love to meet that person. That's antithetical to our roles, but it's also true to the work that we have. Moving from having just imagine 50 people having one-on-one conversations with people about their needs, and there's 2,000 over a year, and that went to 89,000. We're actually at a point where, how do we meet the demand that's coming from the community? They know we're here, we know they have need, they see us as a solution, and we're going as fast as we can to meet it. Absolutely, more resources would help.
Just to be clear on an earlier question I asked about how do we deal with the issues of program disparities between regional centers? Some regional centers provide a lot more services than others, yet they get the same type of funding, and that's a concern of mine.
Part of what we've attempted to approach as an answer is helping individuals and families know what to ask for from a regional center. Sometimes the experience can be described as going to a restaurant that doesn't have a menu. You sit down and you want to eat. Well, what do you have? Well, I don't know. What do you want? I don't know. What do you serve? Well, I don't know. What do you need? I'd like pizza. We don't have pizza. So just putting out in plain language, if you have this need, ask for this, and then putting into what are regional center service codes. That's one attempt, and making sure it's available in multiple languages that we're working on. We haven't published it. There's always kind of a refinement, and we want to make sure we're putting out what's accurate, but some of those differences across regional centers becomes a barrier even in our own task to publish it.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Emerson. Let me turn to Commissioner Arner. She and Bill Emerson are the co-chairs of this subcommittee.
So Aaron, thank you so much for your testimony. It really is enlightening, to be honest with you. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, you mentioned in your opening statement about 91,000 contacts this year. And then you were asked about what's changed, and the federal government has now prohibited you from being direct advocates, meaning in the room during a hearing, that kind of thing. So what's those 91,000 contacts? What's it made up of? What are you doing for those consumers short of being in the hearing room? I want to see if I can understand that one first.
Yeah, you ever had a problem and reached out to a friend and said, okay, here's what's going on, what do I do about it? Mm-hmm. And your answer is like, okay, here's what I know. That's a lot of what we do. So it's I have this need, I need dental care, what do I do? I'm having this problem at the regional center, what do I do? I'm having this problem at school, what do I do? My loved one is incarcerated with developmental disabilities, what do I do? Since our span is anything within a person's lifespan of experience, we can work with and look at how the systems, how does a person navigate the multiple systems, and what's advice to making those systems work. So sometimes it's often knowing which system to send somebody to, advising them for it, and then also knowing when they've gotten a no from that system and need to go somewhere else, or when they can go back to that system to push harder. Oftentimes families are in crisis. This is what's happening. And other times families have some capacity to plan and drive forward. Maybe, for example, in life planning, I'm getting older and I'm worried about what's going to happen to my child after I pass. And so setting those up.
So, but could you actually, you're talking about the whole issue regarding, payer of last resort, for example, can you help, let's say they need to get aid for their child or whomever. Can you actually go with them to the Department of Social Services, or can you only lead them there, but you can't go with them?
Correct. We can't enter the door, cross the door with them. So we can prep them all they can, give our advice. Here's what you should say. Here's what you can think of. We can bring groups of families together in larger classes to give trainings on whether maybe if it's Department of Social Services, it could be on benefits eligibility and rights, or special education, but we have to stop at the door.
Gotcha. Okay. And then the analogy you just used regarding the restaurant, I just want to point out that Tamar, that's got to be in print. It is a great analogy about going to a restaurant and there's no menu, right? Or there's a menu, there's nothing on it, right? I got it. It was so clear, Aaron, about what's going on here in regards to the purchase of services. That was really helpful to hear that one. So you also mentioned that you're involved with, I think, like 80 projects of some sort. What does that mean? You're not funding 80. I'm presuming you're not funding these projects. You are at the table regarding the projects, but am I wrong?
Well, there are funding the projects. There's very little grant giving that we do. The work that we do is by a 5-year state plan with the Federal Administration on Community Living, and we do that largely through our own state employees. So the state employees will work on projects that, for example, there's 117 that we're working on with Black African-American communities in California, 88 with Native and tribal communities, 24 with veterans, 53 with LGBTQI, 63 in rural and frontier areas. So it is efforts that we're involved in. We may be leading, we may be part of them, we're contributing, and those federal dollars are going typically through staff work to aid that effort.
I see. One more last one, because I'm sure other commissioners have questions. So getting back to this issue of the diversity of the $66 million has been invested in that. We're going to see something from Georgetown, I gather, in March. What has taken us so long to get to this point, to even investigate? I mean, from my perspective, what that's all about is investigating, right? And then setting up some pilot projects. But it's taken us years, right? This has been a known issue for at least 10 years, if not longer. And here we are in 2022, finally having some pilots, right, scheduled. What's the council's understanding about, let's say out of those, I don't know how many projects that are being funded out of the 66 million, I have no idea. But let's say there are 5 of them that have incredible impact on the particular communities that they're focused on. What's the plan from the council's perspective of how do we take those statewide then? How are we going to make investments in those? Because we have a tendency in this state to do a lot of piloting, but we never actually expand the pilots into real programs that cross the board, across the board. So has the council started discussing, let's say we see something really terrific. How are you thinking about taking those particular pilots statewide?
Yeah, the state council has about $250,000 a year of its own money to invest in innovative ideas. So it could be innovative on anything related to the system. And when we find something that works and we validate, we then promote it, amplify it, and try and see if it'll take root within the overall service delivery system. While those service access and equity grants through the Department of Developmental Services, they're not ours. We are grateful to be members of the scoring committee and guide what happens through that seat at that table. But when Georgetown says this is what's working, we're glad to help promote that, to help those good ideas, effective ideas, take root too.
Okay. And then last for me anyway, and I see other hands here, so I don't want to continue to monopolize. The IT situation is notorious. It's been going on now since I was in the legislature. So that's how long, at least I'm aware of it, which is over 20 years ago. And yet there's really very little movement going on here in regards to, improving, starting over, whatever the term is to be used today, regarding what do we want to do about the IT system. What's the involvement of the council in that whole conversation?
We haven't taken up directly the conversation of the regional centers' IT systems, their data reporting systems as they relate to the department's systems. We'll leave that to the organizational departmental administrative experts on IT. However, what we do know is that there is a need for portability of information. Thinking beyond regional centers, Department of Rehab, Department of Education, DDS, all have at some point almost the same person. The same person they're serving, especially as people are transitioning from into adulthood, and seeing how those systems can speak to each other, or the person themselves can hold on to their own information and use it in a portability factor. We're looking for ease of use for individuals that benefit and aid them. That's our focus.
And are you taking that focus straight to the department as they start discussing what the new IT might look like?
Well, there is information as it relates to the employment blueprints, where a lot of this data exchange is involved. Commissioner, and I'm glad I get the opportunity to thank you for your leadership in the legislature too within developmental disabilities. In prioritizing our time, I'm likely going to spend time with families rather than IT systems.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Fellow commissioners, I have the following folks who want to ask some questions. Yana Sidley, Bill Emerson is back up, and David Byer. I would just caution you, we're at 12:57. We wanted to start public comment at 1 o'clock to give them an hour so that we can conclude at 2 o'clock. So please keep that in mind.
And I have a moral, ethical obligation to people in queue. I'm here to set the table and then get out of the way. So please.
Thank you.
I'll be so quick, and just to say, I don't understand how somebody could make the decision that you have to stop at the door. It's like telling a criminal defense attorney, you've totally prepped your client, and now I'm going to stop at the courthouse door and you go sit in front of the judge and the jury all by yourself. I mean, it makes no sense to me. So I think that might be a good place for the commission to poke around, because you wouldn't send a criminal defendant to go sit in there, and I wouldn't send somebody who doesn't know the system, like, I'll leave you at the door. So not a question, just I don't understand it, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
And Commissioner, there's benefit to having non-legal sort of lay advocacy be the one that is side by side going to the door with you too. There's so much that can get resolved at lower levels, but right now the system is either set up of I'm out there on my own, or I've got to go hire an attorney. There's middle space.
Which doesn't exist right now, I'm hearing you say. So something needs to be done to, instead of leaving you at the doorway. So thank you.
Commissioner Emerson.
Thank you. I have one final question. And what specific recommendations can you make for DDS to hold regional centers accountable to consumers?
Yeah, those recommendations that we've made largely came out of responses to the rate study. When we looked at there's going to be an investment of $1.8 billion into the system, the council's first question back is, do we know people we better serve because of this? That led to a small study that the council funded to develop a framework for performance outcome measurements, which kind of got it off going, but then those advocates are able to take it to the legislature. The legislature funded more fully. I believe it was $10 million, and that process is underway. So the recommendations that we've made for the accountability from the council's perspective still go back to the individual. Are people better served and having better outcomes?
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Byer.
Thank you. My question relates to your restaurant analogy. In medicine, if you go in to see a physician or a physician's assistant or a nurse, you get a bunch of diagnostic questions, and then that leads to a decision trail that produces recommended outcomes. That's been regularized using technology, and during the pandemic, telehealth is now 40% of the healthcare delivery system in many health systems. What I'm wondering is how the regional centers are doing with respect to telecounseling, and how you all use technology to help potential program recipients.
Yeah, I think regional centers and everybody else adapted as quickly as they could, just as medicine did. We actually didn't think trainings could be done in our pre-pandemic caveman minds. Didn't think that what we did could be done virtually. We learned quickly that it could, and we've actually had to change our whole sort of what we deliver, where we're moving more onto learning management systems. People can have our curriculum, our information on demand. So we're going through the process of adjusting to meet the community need and their expectations, which have changed. From our experience, regional centers are also making this shift and making this adjustment too. It's a time of change.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Byer. And I think having heard that for staff, as we consider this issue of telemedicine, I don't think we can do that unless we also include a discussion about the digital divide and whether low-income families and families of color actually have access to computers, laptops, and anything else that is a necessary part of telemedicine. Taking one last look at my commissioners, I see no additional hands that have been raised. And so let me take this opportunity, Mr. Carruthers, I want to express my gratitude to you for your patience, as Commissioner Emerson pointed out, as well for the wealth of information that you have brought to this hearing. Thank you. So I think, Ethan, at this point, we may turn to the public comment. I understand that we do have some people lined up.
We do, Mr. Chairman. So we will now open the public comment phase of the meeting. If staff can put up the instructions on the screen, that would be great. For those who have joined the meeting via Zoom, use the raised hand function to indicate you wish to make public comment. If you have phoned in, you may email us, do so immediately at littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. That address is on the screen. Give us your phone number so that we know who to unmute when you are called on. So again, but the best way, if you have joined the meeting via Zoom, please use the raised hand function in Zoom. As is always the case at commission meetings, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Commissioners will be able to hear you but not see you. For members of the public and for commissioners, I suspect we may have some public comment in Spanish as we have at previous meetings on this issue. So if you go to the bottom of your screen and click on the interpretation logo, it's a small little globe logo, and then click on either English or Spanish. That will ensure you will hear all of the comment in your preferred language. Otherwise, you'll hear the original audio. So click on the language of your choice. Lastly, I'll just mention, if you have made public comment before at one of the previous hearings, this is the fourth public comment session the commission has held. You have every right to make public comment again if you wish, but I would really ask that you consider that we have probably more people in the queue than we will be able to take at this meeting. Already 25 people have signed up to make public comment or have raised their hands. So if you've made public comment previously, please consider that other people may not have been able to speak to the commission previously, and please give them the opportunity to do so. But you do have the right to make public comment again. We will try to enforce the 3-minute limit strictly today so that we can get through as many people as we can. And last, if you are not called upon, if we do not get to you today, you may always email us comment at littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov and submit written comment that way. It will be read as we prepare our report. So with that, I will ask Ashley to begin working through the public comment queue.
Great, thank you, Ethan. We're going to start off with Rick Hodgkins. Rick, I'm turning on your ability to turn on your audio.
Zoom. Yes, my name is Rick Hodgkins. I am a member of Capital People First, also a member of also a member of the CalAIM, California Advancing and Innovating Medi-Cal long-term managed long-term services and support stakeholder working group, also a member of the Lanterman Housing Alliance, and also receive services with STEP Strategies to Empower People, where we provide employment, independent living, tailored day services, or TDS, SLS, supported living services, and mobile crisis services. Again, it was mentioned that the regional center is the payer of last resort. I would speculate, as it was mentioned during the first and second hearing, that that the system is getting in its own way. Also, I would agree with the comment that I can't remember the commissioner's last name, but I would agree that it's like telling a criminal defendant that the lawyer is going to stand at the courthouse door and the defendant goes in by herself or himself. And finally, I would like to speculate that I now have a state senator who was my former state assembly member about 12 years ago, and also my state assembly member. They're both now Republicans, and looking at their experience, neither one has experience and or knowledge in IDD, and so I will not be reaching out to them. Senator Emerson, former Senator Emerson, seems to have knowledge, interest and knowledge in this area, so I thank him for his former work when he was a state senator. But I'm sorry, the only way to fund not only this system but IHSS and Medi-Cal is to permanently levy a tax on Medi-Cal managed care plans. Not only Medi-Cal managed care plans, but with the higher tier going to commercial managed care plans. We did this about 6 years ago, and that tax expired 2 years ago. The general fund cannot fund these things any longer, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Next, we're moving on to Connie Lappin. Connie, you should now have the ability to turn on your audio.
It's you.
It's me. I'm sorry. We shared the computer. My name is Dr. Harvey Lapin. I am the father of a 54-year-old man with the challenge of autism, and he's my hero. I am a past national president for autism and other organizations. I would like to talk about solutions because I am very aware of public policy throughout the country. And I do know a lot of things talking about lessons learned. One of the solutions here is self-determination, not self-directed. There's a huge difference. What I would hope for is that we look at this and separate out at the regional centers, traditional and self-determination, because I think it is extremely difficult to manage the responsibilities of both programs. It is a paradigm change. You need knowledgeable people to register people in self-determination. This is a solution for disparity. Why? Because in self-determination by law, you have to have a person-centered plan. You have to have it. You don't necessarily get it at all in the traditional system. And then, of course, you have to have a budget that coincides with the IPP, and it does. So this is throughout the country, this has been a solution. And I'm telling you, the successful programs have separated it out. It's still under the Department of Developmental Services, but your results will be incredibly better. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being there.
Thank you. Next, we're moving on to Carol Shelton. Carol, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Carol Shelton, and both of my boys are served by the regional center system. My children and I are Hispanic and Native American. I have experienced many barriers since my oldest was deemed eligible. Early on, I did not receive notices of action, did not know you could appeal, and that there were any associated timelines. This puts families at a disadvantage. I was able to learn more about the Lanterman Act and become a stronger and better informed advocate for my children. I would need this because it took me 14 and a half years to prove to our regional center that my younger son had autism and was substantially disabled as a result. Even when he was at risk of a high-level placement out of state, our regional center turned its back on him. We were later told by a regional center director that only a judge would deem my son eligible, and thankfully, once that director left and my son was reassessed for the 5th or 6th time, he was deemed eligible. This is not uncommon. My oldest was at risk of a high-level placement, and I was repeatedly told that the support that my son required was not available through the Lanterman Act. I found out that not only did that service exist, it had been available in my area for 2 years before it was offered to us. We still haven't received that service. Families need to know about what services are available in their regional center and those in surrounding regional centers. Currently, families are not aware of their rights. They are not aware of their right to appeal regional center decisions or that they can lodge a complaint. I attended the roundtables and all the hearings, and I know from my time working through disagreements and issues with my regional center that without additional oversight, things will not change. I believe this point was made during the last hearing. I was shocked to hear that DDS did not have a coherent support request and did not use this opportunity to advocate for the benefit of the people it serves and their families. I do not believe that disbanding the regional center system is the answer. The answer is oversight and accountability beyond DDS and ARCA. I do fear repercussions to my comments today, but I want to raise my voice anyways. The issues I see and have experienced are generic resource policy is misused. Families are being asked to Make-A-Wish and other charitable organizations for financial support for services. These entities are not generic resources. There are inequitable assessment process, particularly for those with a developmental disability and a psychiatric disorder and those with autism. More help is needed for families to access generic resources. When a person needs a service, they must go without until they find a pair. Why can't the regional center fund while generic resources are explored and accessed? Lastly, please look at the boards at both ARCA and local regional centers. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carol. Next, we're moving on to Tina Harshman. Tina, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you for hearing from me today. One of the things I've heard in a lot of these sessions was, the regional centers need to do more. But one thing that I hope everybody will consider is that the regional centers, unlike other states in our union, are driven by the Lanterman Act in that they do provide the service, or they're supposed to provide services. I would like to know how other states compare with this, and that we do something so that the other states, people don't have to leave to get services. We have, with the internet, have had people trying to find out what California has to offer. They move here, which adds more of a burden onto our system because, say, their state, Alabama or Tennessee or some other place, doesn't have enough services. And so that adds to the burden of what's being done in for the families here who live in California. If I move out of California and to any of these other states, I wind up on a waiting list and I lose all services for my daughters. When you start talking equity, there's not equity among the 49 or the 50 states and 49 states. So that's something that really needs to be considered. I'm also an independent facilitator with the self-determination program. And I like that Mr. Carruthers mentioned about the need for advocacy. And one thing that as an independent facilitator I'm finding is I'm actually thankfully able to bridge a few of those little gaps when it comes to going to meetings for the school, going to meetings with the regional center and talking about the budgets for the clients that I serve by one regional center. And it's helpful to be able to say, hey, I don't think your budget is enough for this client, or, the student at your school needs more of this service. So parent advocacy is also a good role. And I always encourage parents who have been in the system to continue to reach out and advocate for the clients. Thank you very much for your time, everybody, and have a good day.
Thank you, Tina. Next, we're moving on to Ruby Saldana. Ruby, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Sí, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Ruby Saldaña. Yo soy, mis hijos son clientes, mis 3 hijos son clientes del Centro Regional de su Centro, y también soy parte de integradoras, hay integradoras, area manager y cofundadora. Yo estoy aquí hoy nada más para decirle gracias al señor Aaron de nosotros. Eso es algo que nosotros hemos venido diciendo mucho. Nuestra directora Elizabeth Gómez ha estado preguntando por este menú de servicios desde hace años, y yo estoy aquí para decir que hago eco en lo que él dice, ya que esa es la voz de la comunidad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ruby. Next, we're moving on to Carmen Baca. Carmen, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Buenas tardes. ¿Me escuchan?
Yes.
Buenas tardes, ¿me escuchan? Sí, mi nombre es Carmen Baca y tengo 2 hijos, clientes del centro regional. Quiero dar las gracias por escucharnos. Quiero decir que nuestros hijos sí están cortos de servicios, piden los servicios y siempre se les niegan. La desigualdad es una realidad. La desigualdad sí existe. La comunidad hispana se enfrenta con muchas barreras. Gracias por darme la oportunidad de hablar.
Thank you, Carmen. Next, we're moving on to Lourdes Gomez. Lourdes, you now have the ability to unmute yourself. Oh, apologies. It looks like we're having some technical difficulties with Lourdes, so we're going to move on to Fernando Gomez. Fernando, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Fernando Gomez. I'm a parent of a 16-year-old with Down syndrome, and we don't consider him having Down syndrome and consider us being a family with Down syndrome. So I just wanted to say thank you to Chairman Nava and the commissioners for this opportunity to really be able to have this meaningful dialogue. As Director Carruthers shared at the beginning of his testimony, that the system started through families and through parents like us. And I think that the problem that has existed throughout the last 50 something odd years is because we have been taken out of the equation, however which way. But it's really important and imperative that we become part of the solution going forward. And when our son was born and we became part of this community, we knew that it was going to be for life. We have no other choice but to be now part of the solution and try to find the viable options that will improve his life and the many others like him. So to be brief, I do agree and grateful for what Commissioner Byers shared in regards to the Edison quote. The vision without execution is nothing more than hallucination. And that's really what we feel like. So to be able to be part of the solution, I think that organizations that are parent-based, that are community-based, like Disability Voices United, Integrated Community Collaborative, and many others, really should play a bigger and more significant role. And that is being able to be representative of the community that they are uniting. In addition to that, there are state organizations like State Council and Disability Rights California who have the ability to create advocacy and help us as a community to engage within the system. And if we're able to look back at what the State Council used to be able to do as advocacy and reinstate something similar, and we're able to look at programs like OCRA within Disability Rights California and engage that in a more bigger and broader way, I think it'll help us move things forward into an area where we start seeing more of the community being around sitting around the table and being part of the solution instead of sitting here and looking at the problems. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And to the commission, little adjustments like providing translation and even an additional session like this one means a lot to us. It goes a long ways and does not go unnoticed. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. Next, we're going to move on to Gladys Lizraga. Gladys, you should now have the ability to mute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to the committee, first of all, for allowing us to add our comments. I have two comments in regards to questions that were asked earlier in regards to the community possibly not having enough resources to be informed. And my two comments in regards to that is that our Latino community has waken up. It's not lack of knowledge that when it comes to understanding the Lanterman law. The problem is that most regional centers use that law to their convenience and not to the convenience of their consumers. And in regards to when they asked about the fair hearing process, if they consider that process to be fair, that process is not fair for our children. We hope that the committee today does look into making the changes that our children deserve, because this is our future, their future, and they deserve better. Thank you.
Thank you, Gladys. Next, we're moving on to Yvette Baptiste. Yvette, you now have the ability to mute yourself.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the commission and for this opportunity. My name is Dr. Yvette Baptiste, and my son Andrew was served by the system. I'm an immigrant, Afro-Latina, serving families in East LA. I'm also involved with various family organizations across the state. And the families and groups that I hang out with, like Family Voices of California, the FRCNCA, which is the Family Resource Center Network of California. We began over 30 years ago when California began to implement Part C of IDEA, their program for infants and toddlers. And the mothers and fathers that came out of that work helped to build a system of family support in the 21 catchment areas. So there are 47 family resource centers that have come into being to help families navigate. Now, we've been severely underfunded, true, and we've only been working with the early start families, but we have grown significantly. And we feel like, the system actually is undergoing that change that Aaron talked about, that hyper reform. We are all organizations that are parent-led, parent-driven, and reflect the culture of the community. And from my 30-year view of the system, under current leadership, DDS is growing and expanding, not DDS, the organization, but our developmental disabilities system. And that is leading to these fractures and this bubbling up of longstanding pain and resentment that people have. But I believe that these challenges are actually opportunities, and I think this commission is bringing forward an opportunity for us to act together in the best interests of the individuals that we hope, like my son, to serve and to improve that system. But I just want to leave by saying, just please remember that these issues, these cultural, these racial, these bias issues are societal issues. And I really believe that money will not create equity. I actually believe that thinking money creates equity is a very culturally specific worldview that many people of color don't hold. But I do believe it creates opportunity. So please focus on the stories, the families that you're hearing from, the stories of change, the experiences, the positive experiences of the families that do exist.
Ms. Baptiste, I'm sorry, but your 3 minutes has
Okay, I was
expired.
just
If you can
finished.
wrap up.
I was just wrapping up. Please focus on that and to elevate access and equity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yvette. Next, we're moving on to Brian Allen. Brian, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon, committee. I'm a parent of 2 disabled children who are regional center consumers, and I'm also a special education consultant advocate. I assist and guide parents through the regional center system. Okay. First and foremost, regional center system is a broken system right now. Families' needs are not being met at all. Regional center is understaffed. When an advocate or a parent reaches out to regional center for help or asks for IPP meetings or asks for copies of records, they're understaffed. They don't respond to your emails. You have to go above their head and go to the supervisor. And yet the supervisors don't respond. Self-determination transition is taking way too long. Some parents are waiting almost 1.5 years or 2 years to transition to SDP. In addition, the waiting list for FMS agencies for these services to be provided and paid for. There's a waiting list for FMS agencies to pay for the services when they transition to SDP. There should not be a waiting list. I know a lot of families are transitioning to SDP, but there should not be a waiting list. That is a disservice. Last of all, Department of Developmental Service is not monitoring regional center properly. The state is wasting money on a broken system It is DDS's responsibility to monitor regional center and oversee that they are providing the proper services and helping these families out. And I think these meetings need to be continued, and they need to be, regional center needs to be monitored and closely monitored. I have a lot of concerns, especially with my 2 kids and other families. Their needs are not being addressed, and I'm not cutting slack. That's sad. You have to tape record IPP meetings because you don't trust regional center no more. That's a broken system. So please, I ask the committee to monitor regional center and to monitor DDS, because as us taxpayer dollars, we are wasting money, and the state is throwing away money, and regional center is not doing nothing about it. Thank you so much. Respectfully submitted.
Thank you, Brian. Next, we're moving on to Valerio B. Valerio, you should now have the ability to mute yourself.
Buenas tardes, ¿me escuchan?
Yeah.
¿Me
Sí,
escuchan o no me
yes.
escuchan? Ok, qué bien. Gracias. Gracias por la oportunidad. Buenas tardes a todos. Yo quiero compartir y apoyar el comentario de la señora Carmen Vaca y de todos, vaya, los que comenten acerca de la disparidad. Es real en nuestras vidas. Siempre que vamos a pedir servicios al centro regional, y que en mi opinión no es pedir, porque es exigir algo que por derecho le corresponde a nuestros seres queridos, ya sean mayores de edad o sean menores. Mientras nosotros seamos los representantes, nosotros somos su voz. Y el centro regional crea un ambiente hostil y quiere suprimir la voz de los clientes de una manera u otra. Nosotros estamos teniendo problemas con nuestra coordinadora porque queremos o hemos pedido algunas cosas para una reunión de IPP y ella se niega rotundamente, por ejemplo, a dar permiso para grabar la reunión. Algo que la ley Lanterman dice bien claro, se puede hacer siempre y cuando se dé un aviso de 24 horas. Y esto no es lo único. Estoy escribiendo una carta para Little Hoover Commission. La voy a enviar. Desafortunadamente tengo que usar Google Translate y no es muy efectivo, tengo que hacer varios cambios. Solo para contar un poco de la historia de la que mi esposa y yo hemos tenido que pasar en el centro regional cuando nos acercamos a ellos. Y como les digo, no es pedir, no estamos pidiendo limosna. Alguien lo mencionó en el comentario pasado. Los centros regionales no son agencias caritativas. Ellos reciben fondos federales para ofrecer los servicios que nuestros seres queridos necesitan, que por derecho les corresponden. No entiendo por qué crean un ambiente tan hostil y tienen una manera tan grosera de contestarle a las personas, ya sean clientes o representantes. Eso tiene que cambiar. Y yo creo que solo ustedes, el grupo de legisladores, nos puede ayudar con eso. Necesitamos que la disparidad deje de
Thank you so
existir.
much. If you could please wrap up.
Y para eso estamos pidiendo que nos ayuden. Ya me enmudecieron, ¿verdad? Gracias.
Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to David Adams. David, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm currently a GSP provider for one of Alta Regional services that don't have a waiting list, and not many people know it. I would ask that someone create a list of providers that can help these people get their services that they need taken care of, so they can access them quickly. And another thing I find is a lot of my friends that are with Alta are doing without their essential stuff like Social Security cards, IDs, and a lot of them aren't capable of filling out the paperwork or know where to go or can get there. I ask that someone tries to straighten that out as well, that they make sure all clients have at least their essential needs met to be able to establish life. I mean, you can't do much without an ID, and you can't get housing without a Social Security card. One of the clients that I deal with is trying to get housing. They can't get housing because they don't have a Social Security card. And the agency she's working with has got an ILS that comes twice a week, and obviously they don't care or won't help her. I mean, things need to change with these provider services. They need to be accountable to make sure all their clients have everything they need, whether it's ILS, SOS, even respite. I know our agency just started a respite program back in July, so we have no waiting list for that either if someone's looking for it. So I mean, it's just incredible how people can. Matter of fact, the same girl I'm talking about, I helped her get back on Alta because Alta said they lost her. Okay, Alta honestly said we lost her. Okay, this girl is actually misplaced because she should be at SOS anyway, because she has issues that require more help, and it's just I don't know how they decide what programs to put them in, but whoever's deciding that is really not looking at the whole situation. You know what I'm saying? I hope you guys understand what I'm talking about. But that's about all I have.
Thank you, David. Next, we're moving on to Penelope Fode. Penelope, you now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this. I am Penelope Fode, and you got the first name right, the long one. There's 4 letters is the hard part. But anyway, I am a mother and conservator of a 35-year-old individual with autism who's severely impacted by his disability. He's been a consumer with Regional Center for 29 years. I have gone through, I don't know how many service coordinators, trying to find one that will be proactive and not reactive. My whole life with him has been seemingly reactive, and it makes it difficult. And I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to tell you what my story is, because every family is different. But I know if I'm having some issues, lots of others, because I have been an advocate for over 20 years for him, and worked for over 20 years working for others and trying to various autism organizations. I was secretary for over 20 years to the Autism Society of California. I have been a representative in ARCA on their board. I have served as president with the Regional Center Board, my current Regional Center Board. And so I am very involved, but I still don't get the information. I feel like people that work for these things, they say, well, you need to contact such and such but they don't tell you how, they don't tell you why. I'm still getting that. They changed my son's SSI to SSA without telling me. And now I'm fighting with getting him health coverage. The communication is really bad. I've learned everything I've learned has been after the fact. All of a sudden I'm being told, well, why didn't you do it this? We contacted the organization or do this vendor. And it's like, why wasn't that presented to me before? How am I supposed to know all of that? And even when he was a school age, regional center would send their advocate, their client rights advocate, to assist in with that. And you just sit there and play, right? And anything they talked about was regional centers can't do that. Nothing to even help me with the school system. So he fell through the cracks. He was a baby. He was being babysat the entire time. And now we're dealing with issues of him as an adult. And he's now costing the state mucho bucks that probably and hopefully, if he had been addressed when he was younger, would not have happened. And so the families that are now coming out, I know things are different, but I really hope you look at the fact that they need to have somebody to hold their hands through a process, not just send them through the door or send them to the
For your comments, if you could please wrap up.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate this commission and everybody involved, and I've learned a lot from it, and I've heard some good things that people have addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Penelope. Next, we're moving on to Kathleen Van Austin. Kathleen, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. Kathy Van Austin, representing the California Policy Center for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. I just wanted to offer a couple of comments. One, I greatly appreciate the Commission's focus on equitable access. That is a priority of the center, and we certainly hope to work with council and others to really delve down and see how we can reach into these communities and build the trust that is needed to provide those services. So thank you for that. The other comment I wanted to make is on the 1.8 billion service provider rate increase. Thankfully, the Assembly Budget Committee released yesterday. One of their goals is to protect that funding, and so that is a great step. On the accountability front, we do support accountability and making sure that dollars are being spent wisely. And I am not privy to the council's plans on how you intend to identify metrics to measure outcomes. What I would like to offer is that by the time we reach that 2024 full implementation date, it will still take time for service providers to build up and establish core staff and retention, hopefully. So I'm hopeful that your measurement outcomes will reflect that transition and the timing of that transition necessary to truly measure those outcomes, which as a non-economist, I would gather to venture would be somewhere between 25 and 26, but we would be delighted to work with you on that, and really appreciate the opportunity to speak. I have one more offer. There was a gentleman, Fernando, who was frustrated that there isn't a mechanism for families to engage, and I would like to let you know that we are establishing a parent network to do just that, to make sure that parents and families are aware of what is happening. And please feel free to email me at Kathy with a K at cpcidd.org. We would welcome and love to help you in terms of voicing your concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Next, we're moving on to Zachary. Zachary, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Zach Wheeler, and I am a family member of 3 nephews that have developmental disability. One of them are being served at Regional Center of the East Bay, and the other 2 are being serviced at North Bay Regional Center. I am also a vendor, and I'm also a person of color. We're dealing with racial disparities, and as a vendor, I'm dealing with not getting referrals. We're also dealing with case managers at the regional center are now becoming vendors. And when the RFPs come out, those case managers get the majority of the RFPs. That is a system that's broken and needs to change within our system. The system needs an overhaul dealing with RFPs, how that money is being allocated for, and making sure that it does not go back to regional center case managers so they can bring on their friends and ensuring them and their friends' retirement after the life of the regional center is over. That needs to stop. That's nepotism. That's cronyism. It needs to stop. We have to have a better system. That's my time that I would like to spend, and that's my time I would like to say on that issue.
Thank you, Zachary. Next, we're moving on to Shannon Cogan. Shannon, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Shannon Cogan. I am the parent of a person with developmental disabilities. I am an attorney, and I am the director of the Office of Clients' Rights Advocacy at Disability Rights California. The commission has previously heard from my colleagues at DRC who work on our federally funded side. So on the topic of funding more advocacy to have guidance for regional center clients and their families, I wanted to share information about our program with the commission. The Office of Clients' Rights Advocacy is known in the developmental disabilities system as OCRA or OCRA. We are funded by a contract with the Department of Developmental Services, and we provide statewide advocacy for regional center clients. I appreciate Fernando's prior comment about expanding the work of OCRA, and I agree. We exist in the space that Aaron Carruthers referenced. We are both lay advocates and legal service providers. We are a program of about 65 attorneys and advocates and support staff. And of course, as part of California's Protection and Advocacy Agency, we have strength in numbers. We have the ability to collaborate with our colleagues with relevant experience in disability rights and disability justice. We provide advocacy services and have done so for over 20 years. When the state legislature removed the advocacy function from regional centers and determined to contract with an outside agency in order to ensure independent services. So we have licensed attorneys, we have non-attorney advocates. We attend IPP and IEP meetings with our clients. We advocate with Social Security and in-home supportive services and Medi-Cal. Our mandate is to resolve issues at the lowest level possible and to escalate informality if an informal resolution is not possible. In our last fiscal year, we resolved over 8,300 issues for clients and held hundreds of trainings. We have staff in communities throughout the state. We have 21 offices. We are focused on meeting local needs, and we meet our clients where they are in the community. Our staffing is one client's rights advocate and one assistant client's rights advocate for all of the clients of each regional center. And the populations of the regional center catchment areas vary widely. I would love to increase our staffing to be able to provide more and a higher level of representation to the thousands of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that we are meant to serve. So I recommend looking at increasing funding for our existing program, which has extremely high client and family satisfaction rates.
You could please wrap up your comments. Thank you.
Yes, I'm done. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Shannon. Next, we're moving on to Patricia Albano. Patricia, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having this hearing. I just had a couple of, comments that I wanted to share. I truly appreciate what Aaron brought up today, this idea of going to these, when we request services from the regional center, we have to go to the services outside first, as the regional center is the payer of last resort. And that's just difficult. During that time that families are navigating and trying to access these generic resources that they call, there's such a loss of time and lack of services for the clients during that time. I have been sent to access generic services since August, and I have yet to be successful in accessing those generic services for one reason or another. Therefore, the regional center is not able to provide the supports that my son needs until I can actually show that I accessed a service and I was denied or it didn't work for us. So it's a bummer that families or clients have to fail before we can access any services from the regional center. The idea of leaving folks at the doorway hasn't even been the case for me. This is the first year that I had to reach out to the state council, to disability rights, issues with the regional center. I feel like up until now, I have been able to advocate and get the supports that my son needs. He's 18 now and he's on the autism spectrum, but I have not gotten any help from anyone. So no one has even been able to walk me to that doorway, which is unfortunate. I received my forms from the regional center to file for an appeal. Nobody responded to me. So therefore, I will not be appealing because I missed my deadline. So it's very unfortunate that, as much as you try to advocate for your family member, it's just really difficult. And, as a Latino parent with a Latino client at the regional center, we are part of this disparities. And we keep talking about disparities, but the problem's not going away. It continues. So thank you so much for your time. And I truly do appreciate the fact that you did have interpretation today for the Spanish-speaking community. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Next, we're moving on to Felicia Ford. Felicia, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the Little Hoover Commission regarding this very important issue. My name is Felicia Ford, and I'm the parent of a 21-year-old regional center client and an 8-year-old regional center client. And I cannot say that my experience has been terrible because I was initially with Westside Regional Center, and I just learned as much as I could from our FRC with Liz Spencer and Ireda Galda. All of these wonderful people just kind of embraced me, but I was hungry for the information because I had no clue as to what to do with this new little girl with multiple disabilities. What I found is that the more that you're engaged, the more informed you are, the more engaged you are, the more you get. So as a Black woman, I know that disparity exists because I've experienced it because my daughter has. But we always look, in the Black community especially, we look with an eye toward being the answer to someone's problems. We know what it feels like. The entire civil rights movement was started by a Black man. And sometimes we still, when we feel this inequity, when we walk into rooms or things are less than welcoming, we look to each other to at least be a comfort in those spaces that we're really not invited into all of the time. I do think that things are changing, and I think it's something that all of us need to do to make this system better, is to just stay engaged and create opportunities for ourselves. One of the things that needs to change is that small CBOs like mine, Leap of Faith Family to Family Support, was supposed to have an easier way to fill out documentation in order to get grants, to do some of the work that no one else is interested in doing or just simply hasn't been done. And it's been a few years now, maybe 3, honestly, and that hasn't happened. And without sounding too critical, I think that parents are the answer to a lot of what goes on. Trainings are wonderful because it's how we get that more grand scheme of things and how things work and how they're supposed to be. But what we do with small nonprofits and CBOs and just regular old parents, like Aaron said, just across the kitchen table, is we break that down and we do hand over hand. Training doesn't do that. So we need the training, but we need to take it. I'm sorry for the interpreter if I'm talking too fast. I'll slow down. But what we do is actually walk with a family and we share in their plights and in their pain. And it's heavy lifting. I cry every other day. I get calls that are just out of this world that none of you would believe. And there's no one way to fast track any of this effort other than all of us to work together, standardize the regional center system of care, and make things a much smoother, easier path. And let me see, there was one comment I wanted to make, and that we need some kind of unifying message so that DDS, the state of California gives DDS a simple path, and then DDS transfers that simple path to regional centers, and regional centers pass them on to families. And we just have to be able to work together and get that kind of predictable trajectory going for families of color. Asian families get even less.
If you could please wrap up your comments.
Native American families get even less than that. Our LGBTQIA families get even less than that. And they're not identified as ethnic minorities, but genuinely they are a minority and no one's listening. If we can all come together, we would be so happy. And thank you, Aaron, for your message, because I really felt inspired just hearing you speak. And State Council is always very solid. So thank you guys and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia. Next, we're moving on to Michelle Ramirez. Michelle, you should now have the ability to mute yourself.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, thank you. I'm Michelle Ramirez. I'm the CEO of a large provider organization here in Northern California. We provide services for people with developmental disabilities. We probably serve about 1,000 clients per year. And we work in several regional centers. I've been with this organization for 18 years, and during this time, I've seen so many wonderful stories of people with disabilities living their lives to their fullest within our system here in California. I do believe in diving in to fix problems, and no system is without its flaws and fixes. There are some key things that we really do need to work on. I really appreciate all the parents' comments and all the hearings in the past several weeks, months, sharing their entanglement experiences, their denials, their lack of communication. These things are things that really shouldn't happen. They just should not happen. So there are real fundamental fixes that we need. But as someone who's been in the system for years, I do fear that the commission is not hearing some of the true life-changing positive qualities of our system. My family is a testament to this, and I don't share this much with people, but in the 1950s, my uncle was born with Down syndrome, and the only option for my grandparents was to institutionalize him. They told him to move him into the Sonoma Developmental Center. That was the only option offered. This was common practice. My grandparents chose to raise him at home with little to no supports. He died at the age of 24, which many people with Downs did back in the time. Today, some 50 years later, I have a cousin with Down syndrome who's also 24, but she has a much different life than my uncle had. She's healthy. She has had educational supports. She graduated, got her certificate through high school. She participated in day programs, independent living services, and she's currently working in competitive employment with job supports. I mean, this is a really stark difference in just one generation or two generations here of my cousin and my uncle, and then with the different life that they led. And that's because of this unique system here in California. It is a system of possibility. It really is. This could not have happened without the Latterman Act. And it also couldn't have happened without all the people that chose this as their career: case managers, professionals, teachers, support staff, all working together to really, truly, fundamentally change the way people with disabilities are treated in California. That's why people come here for this service. This is what people want. This system does work in some cases, in many cases. Our system is not without its flaws, of course. We do need to focus and fix these things that we're experiencing, but overall it is working. So I appreciate your time, and I do agree, as Mr. Carruthers said, just work with us and we can make it a better system even still.
Thank you, Michelle. Next, we're moving on to Christine. Christine, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Christine, service provider for Regional Center and also a vendor chair. So this is just my comment. I would encourage DDS to meet with chairs of service providers to see what we need and to gather raw information of challenges that we are facing as vendors. This could help solve the disparity as vendors are the middleman between the person serves and the regional centers. I don't think that it's been taken into consideration, just the cost to run a business and administrative overhead, insurances, overtime. A lot of the wages that regional center or DDS has established is not cohesive with California labor laws and wages. And so this has become a barrier for vendors to be able to take in referrals like they would want to. And this would help. I mean, we have vendors who get phone calls by service coordinators just asking us, can you take this client? Can you take this client? And service providers are unable to meet that need because of the wages, and having to wait for the burn study rate implementation of those funds for the next 3 or 4 years. That's just not fair. That's not justified. And so I would just encourage DDS to meet with the chairs of service providers. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Christine. Next, we're moving on to Juana Santa Cruz. Juana, you should now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Sí, hola, mi nombre es Juana Santa Cruz y tengo dos hijos que son clientes de Centro Regional. Quiero decirles que he escuchado, ¿verdad?, de todos los padres y yo como padre también he pedido los servicios para mis hijos y me los han negado. Siempre dicen que la trabajadora siempre dice que va a ir primero con el director. Yo les quiero decir, ¿verdad?, que ustedes que están allá más arriba, pues de verdad trabajen en ayudarnos a nuestros hijos, porque pues nuestros hijos son el futuro del mañana. Nosotros la voz de ellos, seguimos siendo parte de las disparidades como hispanos. El idioma es el principal, es la principal desigualdad que hay en nosotros con la como hablamos español, ¿verdad? A veces nos discriminan mucho. Los intérpretes que ellos nos dan, ¿verdad?, dicen otras cosas que no son. Entonces, o a veces los mismos intérpretes interpretan, hacen la interpretación, pero no escriben cómo en verdad es un IPP. Entonces, yo les quiero decir, ¿verdad?, que por favor, en verdad sí nos sentimos así, con la desigualdad sigue existiendo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I believe we have reached the end of our 60-minute public comment period. For those who were not able to make public comment, let me remind the members of the public that you may submit written comment to us via email at littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov, littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov, and those comments will be read and will be taken into our study process. I also apologize to the commission. There are leaf blowers outside my window, so I hope I can be heard. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our agenda for today. The next commission meeting is Thursday, January 12th at noon via Zoom. That will be a business meeting, and obviously we'll be providing the commissioners more information prior to that meeting.
Yes, thank you, Ethan. Let me say I served for many years on the California Coastal Commission, and one of the things that I grew to appreciate was the significance of the information that was imparted to me as a coastal commissioner through public comment. And I think what we've seen today in the course of an hour was the value and the benefit and the wealth of information and experience that we have been provided through the public's participation and their public comment. We've heard 2 or 3 different issues that I think were pretty eyebrow raising for some of the commissioners in terms of process. and it's all going to be extremely helpful in formulating our recommendations. I'm going to run the risk of displaying my ignorance here and asking staff, and I don't want the answer right now, but what I think I don't understand, and it is the most basic of questions, is how does a parent learn that their child is disabled? And I'm not talking about their observations of if there seems to be a delay in cognitive growth, other manifestations that suggest to a parent that their child is different. There has to be a point at which some professional communicates to a parent that the child is disabled, and that because of that, certain things then are going to be different moving forward. Because one of the aspects that I think we ought to take a look at is, besides telling a parent that the child is disabled, what other information is conveyed to that family about what to do? If there is a physician, some healthcare professional who gives you that diagnosis, is that the end of it? Is the parent then provided just that raw information and then scrambles the best they can to try to figure out who they should talk to, where they should go? They're not all going to go to Google, and it doesn't really tell them the direction, the services, and the care that they should be seeking and who should provide it to them. So I think if we go all the way back to the fundamental question for me, which is, who tells a parent that the child is disabled, and what other information do they get when they learn that from somebody who conveys it to them? I think we can then examine shortcomings of how that parent is educated and informed as to alternatives. Because what I'm hearing through public comment, and in some instances through some of the organizations, is they don't really know how. And maybe they go to the school and then they encounter problems with placement for their child in the classroom, and maybe the daycare. I mean, I just don't know. I've had some experience working with families with children who are autistic, and I will tell you, it is exhausting. If you are a parent with a child who is developmentally disabled, who is autistic, and some of the public members told us they have 2 children who are challenged that way, it is an incredibly heroic effort on the part of those parents to work a job, to care for their children, to struggle through the bureaucracy, to try to construct a life for that child. And then on top of that, as they near the end of their own life as a parent, to concern themselves with how that adult is going to be provided for and cared for in the later years of that child's life. What we have done in these hearings is just seared in my consciousness, and has just sprouted such a deep concern and profound worry about how we help families construct the best of all possible lives for themselves and their children. And I want to thank all of the nonprofit organizations who are a part of this, the regional centers who are trying to do the best that they can, advocates for these families. It is an extraordinarily difficult and challenging task. And we on Little Hoover and my fellow commissioners are honored to be able to have a part in trying to help resolve this. Thank you. Thank you, Ethan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, January 12th is the next commission meeting, and we will see you all then, and I hope you enjoy the holidays.